Do you believe happiness has an expiration date? That pleasure belongs only to the young? For a long time, we've been led to believe that aging is synonymous with giving up parts of ourselves. But is that really true? Imagine this: an elderly man, Carlos, sitting in a garden he himself tends. His hands, marked by time, rest on his lap as he watches the flowers bloom around him. There is beauty there, but also a void in his gaze. Carlos wonders, am I still capable of feeling something as profound as pleasure? In this video, we go beyond taboos and silences. We explore how pleasure in later life is not just physical, it's a form of healing, self-connection, and, above all, resistance against a society that insists aging is the end. Get ready for a transformative conversation. We'll demystify the benefits, face the emotional challenges, and reveal how balance can turn this practice into something that not only reaffirms life, but celebrates it. Because pleasure has no age, it's a gateway to rediscovering who we are. Carlos is not just a 72-year-old man. He is the reflection of many people who reach their later years carrying silences, guilt, and deeply rooted beliefs. Widowed for a decade, he lives in a simple, quiet home where every object tells a story. The chair by the window reminds him of the nights he and Clara, his wife, shared dreams and conversations. Now, that space beside him is empty. For Carlos, his garden is more than a hobby. It's a refuge where he tries to organize the thoughts that often get lost in memories. He is methodical, watering the plants at the same time every day, as if the rhythm of the garden could fill the void within him. Maria, his friend and confidant, is a complete contrast. Vibrant and full of energy, she believes aging is just another chapter of life, not the end. Maria often teases Carlos with phrases like, "You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. When will you start taking care of yourself?" Carlos's greatest antagonist isn't a person, but the voices of the past. The society that taught him pleasure and aging don't mix, that aging bodies don't deserve celebration. This internal conflict is fueled by external comments he hears from family and friends, like, "At your age, the important thing is to rest and accept the natural course of life." But everything begins to change when Maria shares an article with him about how pleasure in later life can be a form of self-care and emotional healing. Carlos reads it hesitantly and, for the first time, begins to question the invisible rules that have governed his life. That night, Carlos read and reread Maria's article. The phrase that struck him the most was direct. Age does not define your ability to feel pleasure. The courage to allow yourself to experience it does. Sitting in his favorite armchair, now worn by time, he was overcome by a curiosity he had long avoided. He remembered moments from his youth when pleasure was natural and spontaneous. But over time, that aspect of his life had been buried under layers of responsibilities, expectations, and, most of all, guilt. Did I set this aside out of fear? He wondered. But at the same time, the voices of society echoed in his mind. That's not for people your age. It's selfish to think about that now. Even his daughter Anna, with good intentions, had once said, "Dad, you've done your part. Now it's time to rest." Carlos felt torn between two forces, the desire to rediscover parts of himself and the fear of challenging the norms he had followed for decades. But for the first time, he began to realize that ignoring these parts had cost him something, the feeling of being truly alive. In the days that followed, Carlos began to face small moments of discovery. He started observing his own body more closely, something he had avoided for years. In the mirror, he saw a reflection marked by wrinkles, but also by stories and a strength he had forgotten. However, each step forward came with new challenges. During a casual conversation with Anna, he tried to subtly broach the topic of pleasure in old age. Anna, unaware of the impact of her words, replied, "Dad, those things aren't important anymore, are they? Family is the priority now." Those words hit like a blow. Carlos felt the old guilt creeping back in, but something inside him refused to give in completely. He began to find strength in small victories, moments when he allowed himself to feel, even briefly, that there was still room for joy and self-connection in his life. Maria, as always, was a safe harbor. In one of their conversations, she said something that stayed with him. "Carlos, the biggest mistake we can make is believing we need someone else's permission to be happy." That phrase echoed in his mind as he, little by little, built the courage to face the judgments, external and internal, that had kept him trapped for so long. The turning point in Carlos's journey came on a rainy afternoon. While organizing some boxes of old memories, he found Clara's diary. The smell of the yellowed paper transported him to a time when they shared their deepest thoughts. As he flipped through the pages, a phrase written by Clara struck him deeply. "True freedom lies in accepting who we are at every stage of life. No matter our age, we deserve to be happy." Carlos stood still, feeling Clara's words echo within him. It was as if she were there, whispering that he still had permission to live fully, to feel joy and pleasure, without carrying the guilt of a society that ignored the desires of those who have aged. This moment brought a mix of relief and resistance. He began to realize how much he had limited himself, but the weight of the beliefs he carried was still present. Confirmation came during a conversation with Joaquim, a close friend. When Carlos tried to share his journey, he received a cold response. "Oh, Carlos, those things are in the past. At this stage of life, all we can do is wait for what's next." Those words hit Carlos like a punch. He felt a lump in his throat, but for the first time, he didn't let the comment shake his convictions. He realized the true antagonist wasn't Joaquim or anyone else. It was the inner voice repeating those limiting beliefs. Carlos decided he could no longer live in the shadow of these invisible rules. He integrated small rituals into his routine, moments when he paused to reflect, to care for himself, and, most importantly, to reconnect with his body and mind without guilt. This was the catalyst that led him to seek something greater. Carlos took a bold step. He decided to join a discussion group organized by Maria. It was a gathering of seniors sharing stories about aging, pleasure, and self-acceptance. Despite his fear of judgment, Carlos knew he needed to step out of his comfort zone to continue his journey. As he entered the room, he felt a familiar nervousness. The atmosphere was welcoming, but his heart raced as he saw people his age openly sharing their experiences. A woman named Helena began to speak. "I spent 40 years hiding who I was, thinking I no longer had the right to feel alive. But I realized that every day I ignored my happiness was another day lost. Now, at 75, I live more fully than I did at 40. Those words were like a mirror for Carlos. He felt the weight of what Helena was saying because her story was so similar to his. When it was his turn to speak, he hesitated. But then he remembered Clara's words. "We deserve to be happy." Taking a deep breath, he began to share, "I spent decades believing happiness had an expiration date, that as we age, we need to leave parts of ourselves behind. But for the first time in a long time, I realized that's not true. I'm learning that it's never too late to feel joy, to connect with who I am." The room fell silent. Then, applause began. Carlos wasn't sure how to react, but he felt a wave of relief and belonging. He wasn't alone on this journey. This moment was the pinnacle of his transformation. It wasn't just about accepting pleasure, but freeing himself from the invisible chains of judgment. He realized his personal journey reflected something greater, a movement to redefine what it means to age with dignity and joy. When he returned home, Carlos felt something different. The garden seemed more alive, the colors more vibrant. He knew he would still face challenges, but now he was certain he was in control of his own story. The morning sun illuminated Carlos's garden, and the dewdrops reflected the soft glow of the light. He watered his plants with the calm of someone who, for the first time in decades, felt he was exactly where he was meant to be. Each drop symbolized something greater: his renewal, his acceptance, and his commitment to living authentically. After the discussion group meeting, Carlos found something he had long sought: freedom. It wasn't just the freedom to feel pleasure, but the freedom to see himself without judgment. He was no longer the man who avoided the mirror or hid his doubts. Now, he was learning to celebrate all parts of himself: the stories, the scars, and even the vulnerabilities that made him human. On an ordinary day, Carlos decided to have an honest conversation with his daughter Ana. Sitting at the kitchen table, with the aroma of fresh coffee filling the air, he said, "Ana, for a long time, I thought taking care of myself was selfish, but I realized it's the opposite. When I take care of myself, I'm more present, happier. It makes me a better father." Ana, initially surprised, looked at him with a mix of admiration and reflection. "Dad, I never thought about it that way, but it makes sense. I'm proud of you." Those words brought Carlos something he hadn't expected: his daughter's unconditional support, who now saw her father in a new light, not as someone aged and passive, but as a man rebuilding himself. Carlos also continued attending the discussion group with Maria. Together, they began organizing new meetings and sharing their stories in other communities. He discovered his journey had an impact far beyond himself. It was as if, by freeing himself, he was helping others find the same path. At the end of a particularly peaceful day, Carlos sat in his garden and looked at the sky painted orange and pink by the sunset. He took a deep breath, feeling the gentle breeze touch his face. "There's still so much to live for," he thought. But this time, it wasn't a vague hope. It was a solid certainty. Carlos hadn't just rediscovered pleasure, he had rediscovered himself, and that, he knew, was the greatest gift he could give to himself and the people around him. Thank you for following Carlos's journey, a story about self-discovery, liberation, and the power of self-care at any stage of life. And what about you? Did this story make you reflect on how you see yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to keep exploring topics that touch the heart and transform the way we see life.